Mercedes is arguably in one of the worst crises they've faced in recent years. All hasn't been well in the Mercedes camp for some time, and it didn't take long before the truth came to light. Lewis Hamilton is frustrated with the engineers over there at Mercedes, and he said outrightly that they continue to ignore his suggestions about how to make the car better. When they were developing the W14, they completely shut him out of the process and ended up producing one of the worst cars Hamilton has driven in his career. He came out to demand that every single person responsible for creating that monstrosity of a car should be held accountable. How much more of this can he put up with? Would this be the final straw that forces him to leave Mercedes? Find out everything and more in this video. Be sure to keep watching as we unpack the juicy details of this scandal. Mercedes is a team on fire currently. No one can say for sure just how bad this crisis is, but it's really bad. They really can't seem to agree on what's the best way to move forward. They equally can't comprehend why Red Bull has widened the gap between them so much. One thing that might implicate them in all of this is their development targets. Funny enough, they hit every single one of their goals they set for themselves when constructing this new car. But it appears they didn't set their sights high enough, because this piece of machinery is worse than last year and everything else before that. The gap between them and Red Bull has basically tripled. According to what their team principal Toto Wolff said in their pace during the races, they still have at least 2 new concepts at work in the wind tunnel, but it seems they aren't coming fast enough. To me, they can't just throw money at this problem. They actually have to sit together and think about what they're going to do about Red Bull's revolutionary run of form. Mercedes haven't done one thing, and that's deciding which route they're going to take for the rest of the season. They have to do this, and do it very quickly, because even though this season just started, it's already slipping away from them very fast. If they hope to salvage any win from the competition, then Toto Wolff needs to make peace between the engineers and Lewis Hamilton. You know what? I feel they might not even bother with this season anymore, because it looks that hopeless for them. Like Aston Martin did last season, they might just decide to give everything up and focus fully on the next season, which would be 2024 in this case. Like I said earlier, they might just be one race in, but Mercedes seems to believe they're not going to win anything. If they decide to throw in the towel and try again next season, then they obviously have Lewis Hamilton to contend with. It would obviously not be what he wants to hear. He'd want them to focus on the here and now. Hamilton wants to understand why the W14 is so far behind what Red Bull is able to accomplish with their state-of-the-art car. This might potentially be what would split the team into 2. Some of the engineers might be thinking more long-term with the developments they have in mind. They'd be more willing to experiment with new concepts and see how they work in the long run, but Hamilton doesn't have that kind of patience. Time is running out in his career, and he doesn't want to win in the future, he wants to win now. He might sound very nice and positive on the team radio, but he's obviously incredibly frustrated that his suggestions for the W14 are being completely ignored. Considering all the work that he did last year to help them develop the W13, it's certainly understandable why Hamilton would be at loggerheads with his team. Hamilton has driven many cars in his lifetime. While he's not an engineer, he spent a lot of time in the driver's seat. He has a pretty good idea of what a Formula One car needs and what it doesn't need. Last season, he had to sacrifice a lot of his own performance in the qualifying races just for him to get used to the changes in the car, changes that didn't end up working. They did eventually salvage some victory at the end of the season, but in my opinion, that was mostly due to what Hamilton was able to do with his car. Throughout the season, he was also able to push his team in the right direction and ensure they were performing at their best. He basically carried everyone on his back. It's a pity they're isolating him now of all times when the end of his career is fast approaching. Hamilton is desperate to get that 8th title, and he was hoping he'd be able to challenge for it with the W14, but clearly things aren't going the way he imagined. After the frustration of the Bahrain Grand Prix, Lewis went out in public to say that he told the team about his problems with the single-seater, but they did nothing about it. Hamilton also mentioned that the team has to look into the balance of the car as it goes into the corners. They also have to look at all the other weak points of the car as a team. This Mercedes we're talking about are multi-championship winners. And even though they haven't gotten it right this year or maybe even last year, this doesn't mean you can ever really count them out of the race. Lewis Hamilton is a highly team-focused individual, and when he says they have a lot of work to do, then they have a lot of work to do. A lot of folks are currently pointing fingers at the head of engineering, Mike Elliott. A few people also hope that James Allison could potentially find his way back into the team. For this to be mentioned, then it must truly mean that Mike Elliott and Toto Wolff are going to have a really fractured relationship if there's another failure by the next race. Some folks think that Hamilton might just be trying to push all the blame on the engineers because he keeps on trying to distance himself from them. Many feel it's just a cover-up for his inability to use the car as well as he used to. Other camps think that he should just grow up. team can't spend an infinite amount of money on development, and even if they could, they don't have that kind of money to spend. To make a Formula One car, some compromises have to be made. Hamilton has a habit of talking about the engineers a lot. Remember last year when he said that he doesn't want the engineers to be arrogant if they get anything wrong? This was about the zero pods concept, which I feel Hamilton hated. Thinking about it, Hamilton might be right. If they made a mistake with the design of the car, then they should be able to admit the mistake and move on as fast as possible. What possibly made it harder for them to admit their mistake was when Mercedes became faster than Ferrari in the final races of last season. This was what motivated them to stick with the concept. They might have thought that it was the engineering that saved them, but the truth is that last year's Red Bull and Ferrari were far below their expected potential. Don't get me wrong, it's a good concept, but it's not something they should be starting out at such a crucial time in Formula One. Right now, the tension between the engineers and even Toto Wolff is very thick. Obviously, the situation is going to affect the confidence of the designers and their ability to do their work. Having to deal with the fact that they got the design wrong twice might be hard on them. I'm sure the Red Bull designers are overflowing with confidence, which might actually help them more in the design process. Rather than being overly concerned about making mistakes, most of the pressure would be taken off their shoulders. Meanwhile, the Mercedes designers would be under a ridiculous amount of pressure right now. The team is aware of the minor problems like the lack of downforce and tire management, but right now they shouldn't be worried about fighting an extra 0.3 of a second. This issue is one of serious performance enhancement. They need to bring this car to a level that has never been seen in Formula One. It would be unwise for them to split their resources between two cars. There have been rumors that Mercedes have a Plan B car just in case they can no longer save the situation. The truth is that they should probably just listen to what Hamilton has to say. He's the one who has the most to lose, and this means he would be a force to be reckoned with if they could just provide him with the right car. Lewis Hamilton, who has a record of 103 wins in his career, is now F1's most successful driver. But his contract with Mercedes expires at the conclusion of the season. Nevertheless, teammate George Russell, who finished 7th in Bahrain, believes Red Bull Racing has basically won the championship. Russell stated after the race that he believes Red Bull will win every race this year, and that Mercedes has to get back to the drawing board and keep developing, if they hope to dethrone Verstappen. Do you feel that Mercedes can bounce back to its winning ways in 2023? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. We'll see you next time.